What was British Bata Company's role in developing Bata factories and shops in, shall we say, West Africa, West Indies, Sri Lanka, India, and other locations, but those particularly? Well, there are two factors, at least. One of which, of course, is that after the Second World War, when the new expansion started in the late 40s and 50s, the Bata head office had sort of resuscitated to a certain degree centrally. So British Bata maybe took a slight back seat in that situation, but the link with those places, West Africa, West Indies, Sri Lanka, India, was the fact that those places were all English speaking because they were elements of the old empire, and they had their education systems were in English, in common with many other well, they're not ex then, British colonies. And so they were instructed in English, their textbooks were in English, they understood English. So if you're going to build new factories and want to train staff, it made sense that you had English speakers who were able to do that. I'm not saying there wasn't the occasional person there who could speak Czech, but I think by far most of the areas that British Bata got involved in were the ones who needed to be taught using English as the medium. The template for the training of the workforce is clearly seen in the West African film. What exactly was it? Well, we've already discussed a common approach to the construction of the factories and the housing associated with it. Not all the types of housing were done at every site. It depended on the location to a certain degree. For example, there aren't any flats that you would recognise from Zlin. There aren't any flats at East Tilbury. They concentrated on semi-detached. The earlier ones are flat-roofed from the original plans. After the Second World War, the British builders put things, basically the pitch roof that we all know and love in England so well. So there are compromises along the way. But as far as the workforce is concerned, they are trained to work the production line. Now, if you take a worker from East Tilbury in those days and ship them out to West Africa, they would find the same production line in front of them. They would know if the machine that they've been working on in East Tilbury, they could go to the same machine in the factory in West Africa, I think it's Lagos, and actually operate there. So they could instruct, hopefully, but they could instruct because those places that we've mentioned with these documentary films are virtually all English speaking. So there's this exchange of trainees, if you like. The other thing is people who were going to be supervisors stroke managers could come from Africa to East Tilbury and do a placement for a few months and learn on the job, shadowing someone who's already doing it, and then take that information back to their own land and their own place. In the West African film, we see a selection of production line working, the cutting, the smoothing, the grading, all the various aspects of putting various bits of material together for the shoes. They're not all leather, some are plastic, some are rubber, but the process is very much the same. And if you were to take one of those girls and bring her over here in those days, she would see the workers in East Tilbury doing exactly what she was doing out there. The weather might be different. We would probably have glass windows to keep the heat in and the cold out. Over there, they want to have shutters and louvers and the flow of air so that they can live and breathe in the hot, humid atmosphere. But apart from those sort of external adjustments to the buildings, the actual layout of the production lines were similar. The next piece, the Bata Heritage Centre has Bata objects and images from around the world. Yeah. What are favourite bits of information that signify the huge importance Bata played in the lives of people around the world? Well, there is a similarity, which we've just discussed, this question of the production of shoes through the Bata method was rolled out to all the factories and all the countries and all the communities. And the housing for several of the key ones anyway would be close by those factories. Other than that, people had to travel in. And I think the question of employment is one that must be taken into account. Thousands of them. Over here, there's lots of, in the 30s, there was lots of unemployment. But there weren't necessarily enough people to actually do all the jobs at the factory. And so the catchment area was much further. And in fact, for example, every morning a ferry boat would come over from Gravesend to Tilbury with all the Sikh workers on board. Then they got on a special bus that said on it Bata, East Tilbury, and off they came in the bus down here, did their day shift, got back on the bus, went home. And people say to me, but you don't have Sikhs in this country that early, but I can assure you we did. And in fact, Gravesend had more than its fair share. And there's still a lot over there. In fact, I met one not long ago who said to me, oh, I do wish the factory was open because my father used to work there and my son's looking for a job. The Sikh concerned was quite happy himself to not to have to come over on the ferry and do a job. But he wanted his son to have the opportunity, which of course is no longer available. So there we go. But I would say that Bata around the world is providing that facility of employment to many, many, many thousands. So that's really important. And providing of the shoes is very important. What else? Well, part of living on a Bata estate is that you had a lot of community aspects. You had the sporting facilities, you had the social facilities like the hotel with a ballroom, things like that. And you were able to run social clubs and things knowing full well that you had like people from the factory who would, and their families, who would come and help you. East Tilbury, there was a works cinema to show training films, but Mr. Bata is not going to miss an opportunity, so it acted as a cinema in the evenings and at weekends, and showed films and earned a bit more money for Mr. Bata, so that was all right. But it ran as a normal cinema. It's now the East Tilbury Village Hall, because with the aid of some lottery money it got brought up to date, but unfortunately no longer up to date for films. But all around the world, on all the bigger sites, they all had their own cinema facility. So the huge importance Bata played in the lives of people around the world. Well, we dwelt on employment, we've dwelt on the social aspects, we've dwelt on the living, housing, so forth. But when martyrs are no longer there, what have they left behind? And this applies all over the world. Most of the production areas in Europe, mainland, have moved east. I did mention that earlier, where they think most of their customers are. I think traditionally, if a Bata shoe shop was to open in the middle of England or the middle of France, they might actually sell some shoes. I think there's quite a people reflect on the old days and how they would like to do that. But I'm not sure whether there will be enough trade throughout the whole of the country to make it viable. In fact, Mr. Bata and his family have decided no, so that's why they've moved most of the retail way out of Europe. But as the world moves on and the Western ideas of civilization move on, for good or for ill, I think that the fact that Bata is at the front line, really, of fulfilling the need in areas that traditionally never had much in the way of footwear. And that in itself, I'm sure, will make people healthier, wealthier, but I'm not sure wiser. Yes, go on. Healthy, wealthy, and wise. And that, I think, is the legacy from Mr. Bata. Mr. Bata, the Bata Company, has always been big on slogans. Advertising slogans, slogans in the factory. And in the Bata Record, which is a weekly newspaper that all the factories around the world produce their own copies, we have an almost complete record of all the Bata records, it's called the Bata Record, in our Heritage Centre at East Tilbury Library. 90% we've got hard copies and 90% we've got digitised. So that record is there for the future. That's very important. But the slogans are there as well, because when the Bata organisation came up with a new slogan, you can bet your boots it was going to be on the paper the following Friday. So three that immediately spring to mind are Bata, shoemakers to the world. Bata, known the world over. Bata, worn the world over. Those are the three that sort of stand out, but there are all sorts of slogans. I myself and a few others actually made a film and went from East Tilbury down to Zlin in Czechoslovakia. And the film of our adventures, Bata, We're Not Afraid of the Future, I think you can look it up on your internet and track it down, but we went in a large coach, and on one side of the coach we had We Are Not Afraid of the Future, which was another Bata slogan. And then on the other side of the coach we had the same slogan written in Czech. And as you would drive through the towns in Czechoslovakia going towards Zlin, and you stopped at the crossroads or something, people in the village would look up and they would read the slogan either in English, which I was interesting, or in Czech, and they'd start waving. And it was a sort of a recognition many years after the factories had shut down in Zlin. They have got the problem we have at East Tilbury. What do we do with all these old redundant buildings? They've done quite good work with them, but they've got so many. It's massive. But there we go. So we're not afraid of the future is another slogan, and I think that's, if you say what has Bata left the rest of the world, well maybe it's left them that one, if nothing else. We're not afraid of the future.